Hello, internet friends. Evan-Benton of Dogg reporting from sunny Mexico. As you probably know, if you've been following my channel, I have suggested that the animal studies, transmission studies, experimental transmission, and experimental infection are key to understanding and dismantling the whole germ theory paradigm. So experimental transmission means your experimental transmission, and experimental infection means you're infecting a experimental subject with a purported pathogen that you're trying to study, and then seeing how that occurs and how the disease progresses in the host. And as I've mentioned before in a couple different videos, that's a problematic experiment to undergo for various reasons, basically because they don't tend to work, okay, and that's a big problem for proponents of germ theory. So this video started with me just looking at a survey of a bunch of those studies that have sort of been done, and it led to some real big implications for where this whole thing is headed, vis-a-vis the surveillance state, our global, necessarily global response to global warming or climate change or whatever they're calling it this week, and on and on and on. So it's a big video, a lot of stuff in it. Put your thinking caps on and get out a pen and paper, because you're going to be taking notes on this. Okay, so I'll just go right to the paper to start with. It's called Transmission Dynamics and Susceptibility Patterns of SARS-CoV-2 in Domestic, Farmed, and Wild Animals, Sustainable One Health Surveillance for Conservation and Public Health to Prevent Future Epidemics and Pandemics. So the abstract, this is where they summarize the whole paper. They're saying we don't know where the C comes from, so it might be originated from animals, and some more stuff is going to happen, and at the very end they're going to say their conclusions from this whole paper that they're going to get into here. We suggest VEing pets and captive animals to stop spillovers and spillback events. That means when the transmission occurs between an animal and a human, or vice versa. We recommend sustainable One Health surveillance at the animal-human environmental interface to detect and prevent future epidemics and pandemics by disease X. So a lot of buzzwords in there. One Health surveillance. What is it? We're going to be answering that in this video. And then, of course, if you've been following this at all, that's going to throw up a red flag for you. Disease X. What does that term refer to? So first of all, who's doing this? So all of these people, if you look down here, they all have a 1 next to their name except for these two guys. So they are all involved with EcoHealth Alliance. So we're going to look at them. And then almost all of them are at the Institute of Epidemiology, Disease Control and Research at Bangladesh. And the other two are just from smaller schools, I guess, in Bangladesh. So let's find out about let's find out about EcoHealth Alliance, all right? EcoHealth Alliance, says Wikipedia, is a US-based non-governmental organization with the stated mission of protecting people, animals, and the environment from emerging infectious diseases. The nonprofit is focused on research that aims to prevent pandemics and promote conservation in hotspot regions. So preventing pandemics, promoting conservation, two sides of the same coin. Because EcoHealth Alliance focuses on diseases caused by deforestation and increased interaction between humans and wildlife. So you terrain theory proponents have a lot to chew on with this little sentence here. Okay, diseases caused by deforestation. Diseases caused by deforestation. That's a fascinating topic that as we see when we get into the paper, that is not really supported by the findings of this paper, but it's a fascinating subject nonetheless. And then increased interactions between humans and wildlife. That does make sense. We're basically dealing with all of germ theory. We're dealing with you know, probability and random chance being the cause of all of our ailments. And you know, anytime someone suggests causality, these people tend to run for the hills, unless it's a, you know, cause that originated due to these random combinations of factors. Right. So we're working with EcoHealth Alliance. Also advises, it says, the World Organization for Animal Health, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and of course the World Health Organization. So they're working with all of these. Okay, and then this is where it gets juicy. Following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, EcoHealth's ties with the Wuhan Institute of Virology were put into question in relation to the investigations into the origin of COVID-19. Oh, I shouldn't have said that word twice. But anyway, citing these concerns, the NIH withdrew funding to the organization in April 2020. Significant criticism followed this decision, including a joint letter signed by 77 Nobel laureates and 31 scientific societies. And then they later reinstated funding. So did you catch that? This group is tied to the infamous Wuhan Institute of Virology, where, you know, nothing happened in 2020, to the extent that the NIH withdrew their funding. So first of all, the NIH funds this group. The NIH also funds the Wuhan lab, and they decided to stop that, but then they brought it back. Okay, you can read about this on Wikipedia if you'd like. I'm just going to go on to their president, Peter Daszak. We've got another Wikipedia article on him. So he's the president of all this. Daszak became controversial due to his previous activities with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, perceived by some as a conflict of interest. Yeah, so this is what we're dealing with. Conflict of interest. Of course, how could that not be a conflict of interest, but who's counting? This is fascinating. Starting in 2014, Daszak was a principal investigator of a 6-year NIH project, which was awarded to his group, EcoHealth Alliance, and which focused on the emergence of novel zoonotic C viruses with a bat origin. Fascinating. And so look, 6 years after 2014 gives you 2020. So he started 6 years before the big event occurred and ended exactly when the big event began. Let's read this. After the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, Daszak noted in the New York Times that he and other disease ecologists had warned the World Health Organization in 2018 that the next pandemic would be caused by an unknown novel pathogen that hadn't yet entered the human population, probably in a region with significant human-animal interaction. They named this hypothetical pathogen Disease X. It was included on a list of 8 diseases which they recommended should be given highest priority. And he was quoted as saying, "As the world stands today on the edge of the pandemic precipice, it's worth taking a moment to consider whether the C is the disease our group was warning about." So he's naming Disease X as this current disease we're facing. Very interesting. Now, prior to the pandemic, Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance were the only US-based organization researching C evolution and transmission in China, where they partnered with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, among others. And then on April 1st, 2020, following the beginning of the thing, the US aid granted $2.26 million to the EcoHealth program for an emergency extension of the program. So not only is this guy huge in the event, and not only is his group, the EcoHealth Alliance, huge in this event, they are the only group in this event. They're the only US-based organization researching the sea evolution in China for the period prior to the event. Now, this is where I had heard of him from, okay, Daszak. In an open letter co-authored by Daszak, signed by 27 scientists and published in The Lancet, it stated, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that sea does not have a natural origin and overwhelmingly conclude that this sea originated in wildlife." And so other people have reported, I thought I made a video about this. I went through all my videos and I couldn't find where I might have talked about it, but others have reported that the whole pushback against the laboratory origin theory comes from this single letter. Okay, this single letter, which is published in the Lancet, and which was spearheaded by Daszak himself. So, am I doing a good enough job of underscoring the importance of this man in the event? The only US-based organization researching this particular putative organism prior to the pandemic, and then the only person opposed to the idea that it might have come from the lab that he is working in. Lastly, for this part, it also caused controversy, that's the letter, since Daszak did not disclose that his EcoHealth Alliance group had an existing relationship with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, with some alleging that this was an apparent conflict of interest. So this is what we're dealing with, okay? Wikipedia, how could this not be a conflict of interest? He did recuse himself, this reports, from the Lancet's Inquiry Commission. All right, and then just the final point for here, he was named by the World Health Organization as the sole US-based representative. Again, the sole US-based representative on a team sent to investigate the origins of the sea pandemic, which of course found that it could not have possibly originated in a laboratory. And he's involved with that very laboratory again. So Peter Daszak is a huge guy, and his group EcoHealth Alliance is putting out this idea called One Health, and I'll just bring up the Wikipedia article here just so you can see. Their definition is One Health is the collaborative efforts of multiple disciplines working locally, nationally, and globally to attain optimal health for people, animals, and our environment as defined by the One Health Initiative Task Force. I'm not sure how the One Health Initiative Task Force is linked to EcoHealth Alliance, but probably very closely. And I just wanted to bring this up just to show that they're putting this out as like a philosophy and ideology, not not an organization. Alrighty, on to the article then. So we got through the abstract and their dubious conclusion. We suggest magic potions for pets and captive animals. We recommend One Health surveillance at the animal-human environment interface, which is pretty much everywhere. Basically, they're saying surveilling the entire world, if you didn't catch that. All right, introduction. So we're going into the history, recent history. The causal agent of the sea was detected as severe acute respiratory syndrome C virus 2. Was it? I have questions there. Next claim, the outbreak was linked to the seafood and live animal market in Wuhan. Again, was it? Serious lack of evidence there. Okay, look at this. It is assumed that the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus and the Sars originated in bats and transmitted through dromedary camels and civets, respectively. But I've covered that. This is the best we are able to state at this point, okay, in the game. 2022. We are assuming that this is where these things come from. And another interesting statement of fact here, experimental studies have shown that animals are not playing a crucial role in the transmission of the virus. Not playing a crucial role. Alrighty, here, phylogenetic analysis is what we're basing most of these claims on, alright? So that means phylogenetic analysis is stating how animals are related to other animals genetically, looking at their DNA. And we found that the virus that was discovered or detected in certain animals was similar to the virus that was detected in humans, and that's how we're making these claims. The claims, which are stated here, is that some resultant mutates, that's variants, have given origin to new variants harmful for the human population or other species of animals. And we're going to look at those claims later in the paper. And finally, we conclude, therefore, we thoroughly reviewed the available literature to understand the comprehensive transmission dynamics and susceptibility patterns of SARS-CoV-2 and its related viruses in domestic, farmed, and wild animal species, and to highlight the significance of sustainable One Health surveillance at the animal-human environment interface as an early warning tool to detect novel virus disease X, we're calling it, to prevent future epidemics and pandemics globally. Again, that's their conclusion. Now, the second section is material and method, and all they did is, not to say all they did, it's quite a big undertaking, but they looked through the literature basically, and they found these various papers that they're going to cite. And these are all the databases they looked through. Different organizations, World Organization for Animal Health, as I said again, Global Initiative on Sharing All Influenza Data. So that's a new one for me, but that exists. The USDA. They ended up with a total of 450 complete genome sequences of SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV-2-like CoVs. And that's interesting because they're not looking at the disease itself, but they're looking at the, how that disease might mutate into other diseases. So that's why they're including like in there, just in case you're wondering. And it's between April and July of April 2020 and July of 2021 is the search parameters. They found 450, narrowed them down to 112. And it says it came up with a phylogenetic tree to diagram out the relations between all of these viruses. And the fundamental design was to clarify the human-animal interfacial transformative relationship alongside the transmission dynamic of these two viruses between humans and animals. So in other words, just they're looking at how they change over time and how they can make that leap between species. And again, so number 3, section 3, results and discussions. We're gonna state the origin of SARS-CoV-2 has not been confirmed yet, but it is clear that the virus originated from animal species. So that's an interesting claim again. Under 3.2, this is the big thing, bats, of course. And Rulli et al., this study showed that land use change and livestock revolution enhanced the zoonotic C transmission risk from rhinolophid bats. And so the bat habitat in China is the most fragmented of any place in the world. So as a result, we're assuming that that's why China has been a hotspot for these types of viruses. Down here, I'm going to skip this. This is just talking about bats in other parts of the world. And then the next section is the poor pangolins. I don't know how they got into this whole mess, but hanging with a bad crowd here. So pangolins, first of all, they're critically endangered. So I can buy the notion that the more you're increasing interaction with bats, the more you're increasing a chance for, as this diagram shows, the zoonotic transmission from bats by a question mark. If you're increasing grazing land, you're sending your cows out to the bat habitat, and that they're getting involved with the bats, then yeah, they could be, you're increasing that chance, right? The more number of times that occurs, the more chances you have for infection from the bats you know, to the pets, to the humans, and vice versa, that whole triangle. But pangolins, they're critically endangered. There just aren't that many of them, so it just doesn't pass the smell test, if you will. With the idea that they could be play a big part in a global pandemic that's destroyed the entire economy of the world. And then furthermore, the pangolin C genome shares 89% nucleotide and 98% amino acid resemblances with SARS-CoV-2. Okay, so this is what the claim rests on, is the fact that the genome is similar. They're not even saying that they get sick. They're not even saying that they've you know, someone ate a pangolin and got sick. It's all based on this laboratory test, laboratory analysis, in silico, as it were. If you were interested, that's where that is coming from. The spike protein of SARS-CoV is more like that of pangolin than that of bat. That's interesting. And then, furthermore, being an insectivorous animal, the pangolin has the possibility of sharing a roost with bats, which may increase the chance of viral spillover from bat to pangolin. But no literature is available to state as evidence of this fact. So, bats and pangolins both eat insects, so maybe they're infecting each other that way, but there's no evidence to support that. Okay, but then this part's kind of a bummer. SARS-CoV-2 cannot be the descendant of pangolin CoV, as the genetic variation is too high between them. Oops. And then they couldn't detect it when they looked for it. And then more interestingly, records from Wuhan's market showed that 17 shops of the market sold 36,295 animals between May 2017 to November 2019, but no bat or pangolin was traded during that period. So I strongly doubt that records were kept to this this degree of accuracy, but you know, that's a pretty big blow for the whole bat origin theory. So we're back to square one. Can't blame it on the bats, can't blame it on the pangolins. That's what this is saying. Future studies are required to prove the link. And here we're going into transmission dynamics. So this is all the other animals. So that first section was the two big culprits, bats and pangolins, and finding that there wasn't much to hang their hats on there. And again, there's not a lot to hang their hat on here either. So with the domestic cat, we found subclinical infections. Subclinical infection can mean either no symptoms or just not enough of a symptom to really mention, unless you were studying these animals very closely. But that's the best they were able to get with the cats. Okay, subclinical infections. They did find evidence that the cats were capable of infecting other cats, but there was no disease being produced. And finally, there's no spillback events from cats to humans. So cats have never been shown to infect humans. We're still surveilling. We're still holding out hope that we can find that. But then next with dogs, that's even worse. They found cases of dogs testing positive in these hotspots. They found reduced smelling power. Here it is. SARS-CoV-2 can reduce the smelling power of dogs, and that's the best symptom that they could come up with through this study. Alrighty, now next we're looking at spillover and spillback events. So spillover is from humans to animals, and spillback is from animals back to humans. Okay, and the big thing we're going to look at here is mink, because this is the only thing that we could find in the pandemic. I made a video about this. Mink from 2 different farms in the Netherlands showed respiratory and gastrointestinal disorders during April 22nd or April 2020. The mortality rate was estimated at 1.2 to 2.4%, which is much higher than the C in humans, which was higher among pregnant animals. No variation in kid mortality was found. Pneumonia, lung lesions were evident. They detected the RNA of the virus. The record of SARS-CoV infected workers is evidence of possible human to animal transmission. However, sequencing of the initial data is suggestive in favor of mink to human transmission within mink farms. So there's no evidence, other words, of mink to human transmission, but sequencing of the initial data suggests that it could occur, and that is the grounds on which, as you recall, all of the mink were culled in Denmark. A total of 644 human cases have been linked to mink farming in Denmark since June 2020. How? Moreover, more than half of these cases, N equals 338, had a history of working with mink pelting in 6 factories and 2 small facilities. It suggests that people who are involved in farming, culling, and pelting of mink have an increased risk of COVID-19 infection. So no, it doesn't. No, that does not say that, because you don't have anything to compare it with, right? If we say 644 out of 1,000 mink farmers got sick, that doesn't mean anything, because we'd have to compare it to 1,000 grocery store workers and look at all the other variables in that case. Okay, so if you can say this, you know, the rate of infection is higher in a certain occupation, then yes, you might be able to make that claim, but this is not supporting that claim. And finally, we have the dubious conclusion offered that depopulation of mink farms is an inhuman act from an ethical point of view. Moreover, without characterizing the lethality or infectiousness of the isolated viruses from minks, farms were depopulated randomly. If we knew that the mink strain would not be lethal to humans, we could avoid the unnecessary killing of millions of minks. Yeah. For this reason, we suggest banning mink farming for fur production, as well as elaborate molecular characterization of mink variant viruses. So is that a non sequitur, or is my name Ev Dogg? So we don't, if we knew that the mink strain would not be lethal to humans, we could avoid the unnecessary killing of millions of minks. So this is, you know, similar to what's going on with in humans with, you know, you have to get the jabby, where you're infectious unless proven otherwise. You know, here we're just assuming that mink are infectious. We just can't take the risk, right? Which, again, there's no, we had 644 human cases. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say these are mere positive test results. This isn't even, with the current event, we're seeing test results being conflated with illness when that is not very often the case. In fact, I've argued you can't make that connection. So we probably just have 644 positive test results. Probably no one even had the sniffles, you know, probably no one ended up in the hospital, and almost certainly no one died due to a mink-borne infection of the sea. But if you can find a case of that, please, you know, leave a comment down below. For this reason, we suggest banning mink farming for fur production. And we can say, well, that escalated quickly, right? So this is the conclusion: is that you just can't, you can't engage in that. And my feeling is that they are just opposed to mink farming because people are growing mink just for their skins, and that just is distasteful to this, you know, group of people. So, all right. Anyway, this is, I guess you'd say this is the real heart of the study: experimental infection of SARS-CoV in domestic and wild animals. And this is going to be a misnomer, because some of these studies, well, I didn't look at all of the different citations, but this is not all experimental infection. Okay, a lot of these are just reports. Okay, just reports from the wild, or you know, zoo animals. They're not going to experimentally infect a zoo animal that's, you know, they paid thousands of dollars for. Okay, that's just silly. But anyway, I wrote down to summarize all of these, and basically they failed in almost all cases. Okay, so a lot of these animals, domestic animals just aren't, or domestic dogs just aren't susceptible. Domestic cats are. Pigs are not susceptible. The best that they could come up with was a mild infection. Well, here you go. You can read this for yourself if you want to. Symptoms. Yes. Yes, they found symptoms in golden Syrian hamsters. They found clinical symptoms in dwarf hamsters. They found clinical symptoms in ferrets in a small number of cases. I made a video about that. And they found a mild infection in African green monkeys. So that was the best that they could come up with. Oh well, and they said something about yes, whatever yes means. Yes symptoms are in macaque monkeys. Okay, so that was the best that they could come up with, was mild infection in a few different organisms. And based on that and the existence of some, similarities in the DNA or the RNA, they're going to roll out an entire global surveillance apparatus. Right, and deer. So this is an example of, they didn't do these studies. These were just, examining, testing deer populations, testing nasal secretions and feces of deer that they found in the wild. And, this is supporting the claim that we shouldn't be able to hunt or anything like that. So here it is, the rollout, sustainable One Health surveillance for prevention and control of future epidemics and pandemics like Disease X. The word One Health was flourished, this is not a native English speaker, based on the popular One Medicine concept by Calvin Schwab after 1970. So this is a new name for me. I'm going to get into him for a little bit. And here he is, Calvin Schwab. This is like a obituary that was published on the CDC website. As you can see, he passed away on 2006. He was born on March 15th, 1927. He was a veterinarian, and so his takeaway message: Calvin Schwab is best known as one of the two 20th century founders of the discipline of veterinary epidemiology, and the concept of One Medicine, now commonly referred to as One Health. And then the other veterinary epidemiology founder was the One Medicine, and One Medicine was James H. Steele of the CDC. And to further illustrate how influential he is, the article mentions, today his graduate students populate leadership positions in public health and research in many universities and government agencies. Now here's a definition for you, which is a little bit different from the Wikipedia definition. One medicine is the science of health and disease in which differences between humans and animals are not considered. So now I need to do some more videos on this. Epidemiology is the study of health at the population level. So it's based on a analogy that in an individual, which is where the disease happens, your kidneys, for example, can fail, and that kidney failure can lead to the disease progressing to other organ systems. And so by analogy then, we're looking at disease in a population, and we're going to say that some subpopulations of that population might be more susceptible to the disease. They're going to get sick, and they're going to get the rest of the population sick. Okay, and that's where the magic jabby comes into play. We're going to make that claim based on that assumption that the unjabbied are more susceptible to disease than the jabbied, and so we're going to round them up, sort of like a cancer, and excise them. This is what's coming. And then the further extension of this philosophy is, you know, the idea that differences between humans and animals are not considered. So, you know, we're way past the idea of looking at disease in an individual, and we're up to looking at disease in the entire world, right? And we're saying, which is interesting, you know, again, there's definitely some credibility here, you know, that a diseased environment can lead to diseased individuals, but is it really valid to look at disease as progressing among a population, right? And the point is that with these people, the people who are making these policy decisions, it very much is. This is the reality. We're no longer looking at disease in the individual, in the organ, in the tissue. We are looking at disease in the population and in the environment. And I've talked about William Osler before. Rudolf Virchow is another big thinker from the same time period as Osler. So going on, Schwab pointed out that most infectious diseases of humans have an animal origin. This is the first I've heard this claim put forth. So most infectious diseases of humans have an animal origin. Very interesting. I'd like to see some evidence for that, as you can hopefully gather from my reading of this paper. This paper does not support that. Schwab also recognized the essential role of veterinary medicine in advancing medical research. Because human medical progress had been so dependent on veterinary studies, he urged schools, blah, blah, blah. So the reason that human medicine is dependent on animal medicine for research is that it's typically considered unethical to conduct experiments on humans. And so we are dependent on experiments on animals to further our research, to further our knowledge in the current paradigm. And he wrote a book here, Cattle, Priests, and Progress in Medicine, which is basically saying that, I believe. I'd like to get a copy of that and see what he's really saying. Here's his Amazon bookstore. So he wrote a book called Unmentionable Cuisine in 1988. Talks about eating bugs. And he wrote a book called Quakerism and Science. So he is a Quaker, which is an interesting, ideology on its own. Alrighty, so that's Calvin Schwab. Now, the three organizations that we're working with so diligently to roll this out are the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, OIE, which is the Office International des Epizooties, which is the French name, and we now call it the World Organization for Animal Health, and the World Health Organization. So you've heard about all of these, and then down here it's going to say the World Bank referred to an integrated surveillance response for zoonoses control back in 2012, because of course they would. And again, we've got everybody who is not a doctor weighing in on epidemics, which is, you know, par for the course, because epidemiologists are not doctors either. But it's probably a low blow, so excuse me for saying that. Another group, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, funded several projects to uplift the One Health capacities to prevent and control zoonotic diseases in human-animal interfaces. They also identified that hunting wildlife and sharing food and resources predisposes the risk of viral spillover. So they don't want us hunting wildlife, and they don't want us sharing food and resources. Everything needs to be centralized to avoid this terrible risk of plague. And this is an important paragraph too, but I'm just going to skip down and get to the heart of it, which is to say that the advent of the C pandemic is a One Health challenge that pleads for collective attempts from various fields and experts. So of course we have a problem reaction solution going on here. This event is so huge and so drastic and terrible that we can't solve it at the individual level, we can't solve it at the community level, we can't solve it at the national level. We have to come together and form a global, unified, One Health response, or this thing will just keep happening and keep happening. Okay, collective attempts, collectivism, collective attempts from various fields and experts. Interesting claim here. SARS-CoV-2 is a hazard for free-ranging wild and aquatic animals. We've basically disproved that through the course of this study. Climate change, along with pollution of water by sewage and other contaminants, helps the virus to spread. Really? We've never established that. This quote, by the way, comes from another article, another report by the same author. So he does that a fair amount in this report as well. Therefore, a risk assessment should be conducted in a qualitative way, very low to high, to identify the risk, release, exposure, and infection by SARS-CoV-2. The risk will be determined by combining the likelihood assessment scale and the consequence assessment scale. So that is your social credit score being rolled out in relation to disease and health. Moreover, biosecurity measures should be taken to reduce the risk of human-animal contact and to prevent exposure of free-ranging wild animals to the virus. So, we need to centralize and control and certify the entire food system. By the way, this already happened 100 years ago. This is why, the FDA and the USDA exist in the first place. This is why you can't drink raw milk, so on and so forth. And, so we can go back and examine, in history, we can examine the effects of this type of surveillance and biosecurity and see if it's had an effect or not. Now, this is interesting. Functional wildlife health surveillance programs are absent in most of the countries of the world. And this is a problem here. However, you might note most countries of the world did not experience a sea pandemic in 2020, particularly Africa, right? Africa experienced no sea, as did India, which basically, there's a correlation between the existence of functional wildlife health surveillance programs and the severity of the pandemic. And here we are back to the V. We should also eliminate the possibility of SARS-CoV-2 establishment in novel animal hosts to reduce the animal-to-human transmission. Continuous sero and genomic surveillance will guarantee effective V production. We need to think about Vs also for pet animals, as they can be an asymptomatic carrier of the virus. So this is, I mentioned they're talking about giving the V to cats and dogs in the very beginning, and I just want to point out they're not saying to give the current V. Okay, they are saying we should develop some new ones for those. Okay, so credit where credit's due. But look at this, sero and genomic surveillance. Okay, so we're talking about like 23andMe 24 hours a day. And then we should eliminate the possibility of SARS-CoV-2 establishment. Okay, we don't even know that this is theoretically possible yet, but we have to eradicate every possibility of this. And this is the current thinking on epidemiology, that we saw back with smallpox. We have to completely eradicate a disease, and it yields diminishing returns. It's pretty easy to see. Alrighty, so in conclusion, SARS-CoV-2 is assumed to emerge from an animal source and later spill over to humans. This is what they're saying, people. And in conclusion, capturing wild mammals for food or breeding should be banned also. So again, they're coming after the hunters, guys. They're coming after everyone. And moreover, we recommend a combined One Health surveillance in both humans and animals to prevent future epidemics and pandemics. And then the V, in accordance with the V in humans, V of pets, farmed, and captive wild animals in accordance with it in humans should be done. And this isn't just saying, mandatory, compulsory, by the way. This is just saying, like, when you do it to humans, it should be also done in animals. And that is that. So a lot of stuff to get through there, and a lot of new information for me as well. So I'm going to be making a lot more videos on the One Health Alliance and the idea of One Health, and hope you can see that you know, this is where we're transitioning to. We're transitioning from the pandemic into the permanent you know, global, what are they calling it, climate change scare. Okay, this is how we're doing it. This is the method by which we're going to transition from the pandemic to the permanent you know, revolutionary state of you know, climate change reality, and we're going to use that to justify massive global surveillance, not just of you and me, but of Sparky and Fluffy, and even probably your goldfish. Not to mention, you know, the food supply that's been going on for already 100 years. So that's it for me. Thanks for making it all the way through that video. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so go ahead and share those down below in the comment section, and share this video, subscribe, and thanks for watching. This has been Evan Benton of Dogg for Mayor. Have a good night.